Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary and General Dempsey, Mr. Hale. And we've talked a lot, and I think appropriately so, about the risks of national security in the United States, but those risks are mitigated not simply by what's done in the Department of Defense budget, it's also mitigated by what's done in the State Department budget, the Homeland Security budget, TSA, the FBI, a whole host of agencies that contribute directly, indirectly to the national security of the United States. And we've talked about this sequester, but to simply sort of shift those cost in a potential sequester without additional revenue, I mean, strictly do it by cutting more, will invariably catch the FBI, Homeland Security, TSA, contracting, and other functions that might not be in the purview of the Department of Defense, but significantly contribute to the risk that we run as a nation. Is that an accurate perception, Mr. Secretary?
No, absolutely. I think Senator, national security is dependent on all of the things you just cited, but frankly, it's dependent on more. Both, we're talking about sequester on defense, but sequester also takes place on the domestic side of the budget. And very frankly, our national security is dependent not just on the national defense side of that ledger, it's dependent on the quality of life that we provide for our citizens. So all of that could be impacted through sequester.
One other aspect of this whole debate, and has been pointed out, has been, and particularly with respect to sort of platforms that you've decided are not affordable at this juncture. But I would presume, and General Dempsey, you might comment, that the one of your calculations is not just the number of platforms, but the capability of platforms. And as you make, particularly when it comes to both aviation platforms and ships, that you've made some, and your colleagues have made careful calculations about increased capabilities with those remaining ships versus what you'd have to do with the and airplanes. Is that accurate?
It is accurate, Senator. We mapped the budget decisions to the strategies. Fundamentally, are we going to deliver the strategy we've described, given the decisions we're about to make? And as we've talked for years, we are moving toward platforms that are both more capable, but also multi-role. So, for example, the A-10, which is exclusively, and by the way, the uniform I wear, I'm a huge advocate of the A-10, the Warthog, because it provides close air support. But we're at a point where we think it's prudent to force ourselves into a more multi-role capability in that regard. So we mapped the decisions to the strategy.
Thank you very much. One of the other aspects that's been brought up, and I think it goes to my initial question about the broader scope of national security, is that proactive engagement. I think one of the lessons of the last few years, proactive engagement is very helpful to us. Had we been more engaged in some countries, we might have mitigated the dangers we faced in the last decade. When you talk about your meeting in Egypt, when you talk about your multiple meetings in Pakistan, when you talk about a lot of that is, one might argue, just as critical to national security, but is not measured in terms of brigades or airlift, et cetera. And it goes also to the issue of this, special forces, not so much in their counterterrorism mission, but in their training and their collaboration mission. Can you comment on, General Dempsey, on how this budget will be encourage proactive engagement at every level?
We've accepted as a core competency of all the services building partner capacity. And so when you have a chance to have Ray Odierno in here, for example, he'll talk about his desire to meet our strategy by taking general purpose forces who have been completely consumed in Iraq and Afghanistan and who will be less consumed now, and employing them in that role by a regionally aligned brigade, for example. So AFRICOM has a U.S. Army brigade in the R4 Gen Readiness Cycle that can deploy in any number of ways as headquarters, or it can send teams, it can reorganize itself to go and engage nations in the particular combatant command where it might be needed. So I think this budget does that. And it is one of the ways that we are mitigating risk, as you suggest.
Mr. Secretary, you suggested that, and I think you said, that one of the fastest growing areas of cost in your budget is personnel costs, particularly healthcare costs. You're looking at a very tight budget this year. I think even if we're able to settle some of our political fights up here, the idea of defense budget growing at the rate it grew over the last decade is not within anyone's purview. At some point, if you don't take effective steps with respect to personnel costs, it becomes so big, in my view, that it eats into what is the great risk General Dempsey sees in sequestration. It all comes out of operations, maintenance, and training, and suddenly you have a force that is there, but it's not capable. And do you have a notion of sort of how much time we have left before these uncontrolled, unless we take steps, these costs eat up all of the operations and maintenance?
Well, as I mentioned, this is an area of the budget that's grown by 90%, and it consumes now close to half of the defense budget, right, Bob? About a third. About a third of the defense budget is in the compensation area, and the problem is at that rate of growth that's going on, it's moving more and more into these other key areas of the defense budget and crowding them out. And so if compensation is not touched, if we don't control the costs of growth in the compensation area, what it means is that we're going to have to take it out of force structure. We're going to have to take it out of training. We're going to have to take it out of other systems, and it's going to mean that ultimately we won't have a balanced approach to dealing with the defense savings that we need to deal with. So even in talking with members and talking with the generals and talking with the chiefs, they acknowledge that as tough as this is, and it is tough because it affects obviously troops and their families and retirees, but if we don't begin the process of developing some kind of cost control in the out years and limiting the growth that's taking place, then we're going to pay a very high price within the next few years.
Is that your conclusion, General Dempsey?
Senator, it is. You know, we talk a lot about keeping faith, and oftentimes that's equated to how many dollars we're putting in a soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine's pocket, but it's a lot more than that. Keeping faith is making sure they're the best trained, best equipped force on the planet, and to do that, we've got to balance the budget against all of the various levers we have to pull.
Thank you, gentlemen.